Good evening, everyone. You can hear me? Yep? Okay. So I'm honored to, I don't think we have to introduce Paul Kester, but I want to tell you how I met him. Even though I was a rabbi at Sinai for a long time, just the last couple years as senior rabbi, and this young man called me 2 years ago, and he said, if you're going to be my rabbi, I need to know who you are. And so I had the opportunity to go to your apartment across the street at the Belmont, and that's when you gave me this beautiful gift, the book Memories. If you don't have Paul's autobiography, we'll find out how to get more copies. My early life in Germany and Sweden, and it's an amazing, amazing story of your family. And I know we have others connected here to the Kinder Transport with Deborah Oppenheimer, and if Marcy, is Marcy still here? Marcy Maneker. Any other Kinder Transport families here? Yes, as well. And so, as we don't have enough survivors to continue to tell their stories, it's our responsibility. I feel a heavy responsibility on this congregation to learn from those who literally walk those steps. As Lena Pornazarian said, we have 42 young professionals in Poland right now with Rabbi Wolpe and Dr. Michael Barenbaum, and unbelievably meeting released hostages in Poland. It's unfathomable to even think like that, but that's what they're doing. I'm looking forward to Rabbi Wolpe's words when he gets back. And I had the opportunity also to travel to Poland 3 times with high school students as a rabbinical student. And what I always heard from our tour guide was, you are not experiencing the Holocaust, you are learning about the Holocaust. And that was for me as a 20-year-old 20 years ago. But when we speak to you, Paul, you experience the Holocaust. And so let's begin in the beginning of your story. And what was your Jewish life like as a young child?
Well, I was born in 1925 in a town called Wiesbaden, near Frankfurt in West Germany. I had a nice family, parents, grandparents, and a sister who was 2 years older. We were kind of middle class, lived in an apartment. Family owned a large clothing store in the center of town. My childhood was very happy. I have only good memories. Yes, I remember the year 1933 when Hitler came to power. I had just learned to read, and there were big signs all over town declaring, the Jews are our misfortune, the Jews are criminals, the Jews caused us to lose the First World War. Now, 7 years old, I couldn't quite figure it out. The town where we lived, a town of 300,000 citizens, had 3,000 Jews. I knew that all of Germany had a population of about 65,000, including 600,000 Jews, or in each case, barely 1%. Now, I couldn't figure out how this 1% could have caused all that misfortune that Germany, during those years, post-war years, inflation, and now the Great Depression, how it all could have been caused by this tiny minority. But it was a new ideology that was proclaimed. The Germans, pursuant to the Nazi Party, were the master race, superior to all others, and were allowed to mistreat any minorities, or what they considered inferior races. The only minority in Germany at the time were the Jews. So we were being pursued, new regulations enacted. It must have been quite an impact on the adults. I know that my family had lived for many, many years in West Germany. As a matter of fact, we could trace our family tree back to the year 1400, always in West Germany. We were part of society, and all I knew, the difference between being Jewish or being Christian was if you observed religious services, we went to synagogue, the others went to church. And the same was the case when I had started school. I was the only Jewish boy in a class of 35. We went to separate, boys and girls in those days went to separate schools, and I was not being harassed or anyway treated differently from the other kids. And even when I started high school, in those days, at the age of 10, the only incident occurred when my father tried to enroll me. There were 3 high schools for boys in Wiesbaden. The first one, the principal told my father that the school was 100% Nazi. He could not safeguard the safety of his child. That was basically a rejection. The other school had some other excuse. The last one accepted me and my friend Leo. We were now 2 Jewish boys, not treated any differently from the others, either by teachers or by the other boys. The years went on. Yes, in school we had racial indoctrination. The teacher did show the difference between the Jewish race and the superior Germanic race. As a matter of fact, during one lecture, this was illustrated by having big pictures on one wall showing ugly pictures, distorted, of Jews with big noses, fat stomachs, and just plain ugly. On the other side, the Germanic race and Nordic race, blonde, tall, good-looking fellows. Now, in Wiesbaden, not all the kids looked like the ideal Germanics on that picture, on that wall. But I, at the time, had blonde hair and a straight nose and probably met the conditions of being a good-looking Germanic boy, at least as much, if not more so, than the other boys in class. And my friend didn't look by any way like what was shown on the other side. But the teacher explains the superiority of one race versus the other. And at the end, he said, we have 2 Jewish boys. They don't look like this. But keep in mind, this is a lecture in theory. Many years later, I spoke in Germany to German students, and they asked me, how could a teacher teach such nonsense? I said, it's easy. He got his curriculum handed to him by the Nazi Department of Education. He had a choice, teach it or lose his job and probably be identified as an opponent of the government. Anyhow, my life continued. I had free run of the town. I belonged to a Jewish sports club. The other boys belonged to the Hitler Youth. And I didn't see much difference between them and me and my Jewish friends. But by 1938, it appeared that Nazi government was staying in power, and even my family started thinking about having to emigrate. A difficult decision for a family with small children, trying to get to a country where you didn't speak the language, where you couldn't practice your profession or your business, and you were not allowed to take any money or anything of value when you left Germany. Still, My family wrote to some relatives in New York. Could they provide affidavits of support, which were required at the time to gain legal entry to the United States? They couldn't do it, but they were willing to take one of the children. My sister being the older one. In the summer of 1938, my mother still took her to Hamburg, where she boarded a ship, and off she sailed, this young girl, towards an unknown destination, away from everything she knew, her family, the surroundings, friends, but already conscious of the fact that she was leaving a country where her future was uncertain and possibly endangered. My life that summer went on quite normal. Vacation, I could freely travel, visiting relatives. I came back, sports, movies, you name it. Until one day, in November of 1938, I was in class. Teacher was giving a lecture. It was interrupted by a school official who said that my friend Leo and I, we should go home, that there was trouble in town. Not knowing what he was talking about, we still did as we were told. We were come home, I find my mother and grandmother who live with us upset. What had happened was when they, as always, mid-morning, were leaving our apartment to walk to our store about 15 minutes away to the center of town, they saw the synagogue burning and some stores being vandalized. My father that morning went early to open the store, saw a huge crowd. The store had many display windows, many glass shelves and cabinets, and the mob outside was busy smashing it all. A policeman in attendance did not interfere, but told my father to come with him. Somehow, trying to get through the crowds, my father sidestepped, went into hiding. Because what was happening that day was a major pogrom, government organized, against the Jews still in Germany. It was the beginning of the end for Jewish life in Germany and ultimately for the Jews of Europe. I went the next day to school, was called to the principal's office. From now on, Jewish children were not allowed to attend any German schools anymore. It was the end of my German education. Following evening, my father had come back. Supposedly the arrests of the men had ended. At about 9 o'clock at night, the doorbell rings. I open it up. A man in civilian clothing identifies himself as a member of the secret police, orders my father to come with him. Within minutes, he's gone. My mother tells me, get on your bike, go to our friend's house, warn them. The arrests are still going on. I still remember that dismal night. And the following day, when my mother and I went to police headquarters, trying to find out what happened to my father. No answer. A few days later, we find out he was sent to a concentration camp with so many other Jewish men, a camp called Dachau, which existed until its liberation by American troops at the end of World War II in 1945. Now, immigration was no longer a question of should we or shouldn't we. emigration was called for if you want to save your life. But where to? Yes, the Nazis would let you go, but the borders of all countries were closed. Still, this was all in a matter of days. Suddenly, England declares that they would take 10,000 Jewish children from Germany and some other West European countries would take a few too. My mother puts me on the list of all of them. And as a matter of fact, 1 month after the beginning of the pogrom, I bid my friend Leo goodbye. He had relatives in Amsterdam and Holland. He got out. I was left behind. Still, after 4 weeks, my father comes back. Somehow he had withstood the hardship, the mistreatment, the starvation of the camp reasonably well. And about the same time, we receive a letter from a distant relative in Sweden, a teacher at a Jewish boarding school. Sweden had declared its willingness to take 500 Jewish children from Germany, and that teacher had put my name on the list. 2 days later, I get a letter from Swedish embassy in Berlin, Germany's capital, that a permit was available for me to be picked up that would allow me to enter Sweden. How to get there? To England for the 10,000 children. They had organized trains and transports by the various organizations. Somehow, we could not find out if anything like that was available for Sweden. But my father knew that there was an honorary Swedish consul at one of the German chemical factories outside of Wiesbaden. We got an interview. My father says, "What do we have to do to get my son to Sweden?" This man said, "Put him on the train. Get him out quick." It was good advice. Next few days, my personal belongings had to be shipped ahead of me. They were packed under the very close inspection and supervision of a Nazi official to make sure that I would take along only used clothing and personal belongings, all of no value, not for anything that possibly could be converted to cash in the land of my destination. Last minute farewells, and on the 9th of January, after 2 months of pogrom, of persecution, of misery that I still remember in many details, I bid my parents goodbye at the train station of Wiesbaden. We exchanged words of hoping soon to get reunited again. I make the 7-hour trip to Berlin, stay with a cousin. Next day we go to the Swedish embassy. After a couple of days of red tape, I get my permit for Sweden. And on the 15th of January, 1939, I board a train in Berlin that takes me to the North Sea, to the Baltic Sea, about another 6 or 7 hour train ride. What do I remember? Last minute inspection by an official in black uniform, inspecting my little hand luggage. A last minute gift, a book, he confiscates. It didn't bother me. We get to the port, and meet at the Baltic Sea, first time I see an ocean. The train gets on a ferry to start its 5-hour ride across the Baltic Sea from northern Germany to southern Sweden. What do I remember? Yes, the ferry starts moving. I look out and I see the German coastline slowly disappearing. And I remember I had a tremendous sense of relief. Not that I left my family or everything I knew up to that time. I was now 13 years old, but relief that I had escaped from a country where now it was a crime to be Jewish. I get to Sweden, join a refugee children's home. 60 other kids are there, all from Germany, similar background as mine. They become my family. And many of them became lifelong friends. As a matter of fact, one of the girls, 10 years later, became my wife. I stayed at that school, it lasted for about a year, then it was closed down. I come to another children's home. This is all under the auspices of the Jewish, small Jewish community of Stockholm. And I'm 14. I'm allowed to start a Swedish high school. I visited it for 2 years. I became a good student and wanted to continue to go to school. But at the age of 16, 1942, there were no means to do that. So I managed to get to Stockholm, Sweden's capital. I got a job in an office, enough to support myself, but always wanting education, I continued to attend a Swedish evening high school. And over the next 3 years, I managed to complete the Swedish requirements for high school graduation and passage of what was called the student exams, which were required if you ever wanted to pursue another college or academic career. What happened to my family? Well, first of all, I have to say that I had gotten to Sweden in January of 1939. 9 months later, Nazi Germany invades Poland, and the Second World War has started. And within 1 year, all of Europe is occupied by the victorious German armies, except for England, and 2 countries were not invaded. One was Sweden, the other one was Switzerland. It was my luck. It assured my survival. My friend Leo, who came to Holland, was less lucky. During its occupation by the Nazis, the Jews of Holland, like all the Jews of Western Europe, were sent east. I know he was sent to Auschwitz in the spring of 1942 and died there a few months later. I still think of what those 4 months must have been like. He was one of 1.5 million children that were murdered by the Nazis. 1.5 million children that we remember today at the occasion of Remembrance Day for Shoah. I was one of 15,000 children that were saved under the Kinder Transport Program. It was my luck. Yes, I stayed in contact with my family by mail because Sweden was neutral. At the time of the war, the start of the war, yes, these letters were censored by the Nazis. If anything was written that the Nazi censor didn't like, it was blacked out so you couldn't read it. As a matter of fact, some of those letters I took some years ago to the Los Angeles police headquarters, where they have a machine where you can read what's written under that black cover. I think they did. They were good at exterminating things, including writing. In Sweden, we learned what was going on the continent and learned of the start of deportations from Central and Western Europe to the newly occupied parts of Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Western Russia. And in August of 1942, my parents could write to me that they were ordered to leave and would come, were probably sent to Theresienstadt, a ghetto town in what is now the Czech Republic, and that they would not be able to stay in contact with me. But I wrote cards to them. I registered mail with return receipts, and the Germans, observing international postal regulations, within days I had their cards back with their addresses and their signatures. I could write to them, and they could send me some letters, very much prescribed how many lines I could write, but at least I knew where they were. Until 5 months later, beginning of 1943, my letters to them came back with a stamp that the person to whom the letter was addressed had departed, and that the new address was unknown. I knew that was bad news. We knew in Sweden that Theresienstadt was a transit camp, and my parents, I learned later that they were in a transport in January of 1943 of 2,000 Jews from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz, where upon arrival, all 2,000 were sent to gas chambers and murdered. My grandmother could stay on for another year, but died there of starvation and ill treatment. My life in Sweden continued normal. It was, I worked, I had good friends, and I felt at home there. But after some travel in Western Europe in 1947, and still see the slow recovery from the devastation of the Second World War, and also seeing the encroachment of the Soviet Union towards Eastern and Central Europe, plus being young and enterprising, I decided to come to this country. And in 1948, We arrived, my wife and I, in this country, in Los Angeles, where I've lived happily over the last 76 or 77 years. It has been a good life, a happy life. Yes, I became, as immigrants, a typical immigrant life the first couple of years. Yes, I realized I needed more education. I enrolled in extension courses at UCLA in accounting. I became a CPA, certified public accountant, a member of the firm of Kenneth Leventhal and Company. It was a demanding but stimulating and, I must say, highly successful career. We were able again, my wife, who incidentally originally came from Berlin, she lost her mother in the Holocaust. My wife and I were able to start again what I call a normal life, a life as it is lived in this country, in Western Europe. We were lucky. We had good family. I got joined again with my sister who was in Los Angeles and her family. Her son is here tonight. And thinking back on those 70-some years, they were good years. Yes, I was lucky. I was lucky that my parents were willing to let their young children depart, not knowing if they would ever see them again. I was lucky that I came to a neutral country, not involved in the Second World War. I was lucky that Hitler lost the war. It saved my life. I was lucky that I was enough enterprising or had the courage to come to this country to take advantage of its opportunities, of its freedom, of its democracy, and all that it offered. And when I speak to young students, which I do quite often, as a matter of fact, I did it as recently as this morning, I tell them what happened to me and 6 million in the first half of the 20th century. Make sure that you protect the freedom that you currently enjoy. Nothing is guaranteed, but be aware that times can change. Make sure that you who live in the 21st century can save the democracy, the opportunities, the well-being that's given to you. And I wish everyone that times stay peaceful, that we can speak out against intolerance, anti-Semitism, hate, and I always still hope for a better world. Any questions?
You answered all of my questions in one answer. But one thing that you just kept repeating was the word lucky. And because perhaps you were lucky, we have been blessed. And for us, that's what makes us lucky, that we have been blessed because you have decided to make your spiritual home right here at Sinai Temple. Just last year, you spoke to our 9th grade Nazarian fellows, and I love that moments of L'Dor Vador, when they don't just read it in a book, but they hear it from your heart and your soul. And so on this Yom HaShoah, we pray for the memory of Leo, of your parents, of your loved ones, and the strength that you give us to continue to fight for that freedom that we all enjoy here as well. So if there are any questions for Paul, I know it's been a double header for him, so I want to make sure he also has rest. But Marcy, please.
Thank you for sharing your story. I have a question about the logistics. When you were given the opportunity to go on the kinder transport, was there a lot of paperwork that had to be created or generated, or documentation from? I know the reason I'm asking is we found 2 birth certificates for my mom, and it gives us the impression, we don't know, it's too late to ask the question, that maybe they applied once and got rejected, and she applied a second time and got accepted. So that's why I'm asking.
Was there a lot of paperwork when you applied for the kinder transport? Because Marcy's mom was on the kinder transport, and they found 2 birth certificates, and her mother has passed, so she can't ask the question. What was the paperwork like? I know you were a young child, but
It was not too bad, except one incident that's kind of amusing. I did not need a passport, but what was called a Kinderausweis, which is the equivalent of a passport. And knowing that my mother and I, my father was still in concentration camp, went to the proper authority, I think it was the police department in Wiesbaden, to get that document. And people were waiting, and it was very difficult, and officials were not very polite. Finally, we get into the office, and there's this official and says, "What do you want?" So my mother said, "I want to have the Kinderausweis for my son." "All right, name." So-and-so. Mother's maiden name, Baum. "Baum? Are you a sister?" All of a sudden, big smile. "Are you the sister of Walter Baum?" "No, he's my cousin." "How is he?" It so happened that Walter Baum was a boyfriend a close friend of his, who had in the 1920s already emigrated to the United States, and that broke the ice. So very easily I get my Kinderausweis. Now I come to Berlin. I go to the Swedish embassy. "Yes, you are on the list, but we can't give you the visa. It has no J. J for Jew." They were instructed to let the 500 children in who were Jewish. You had to send the document back to Wiesbaden. They got the J, sent it back to Berlin. Fortunately, postal connections were very efficient, like everything else in Nazi Germany. And so I got the J, and it came back, and that took care of whatever paperwork I needed.
Paul, thank you very much from all of us for sharing your life story. After so many years in America, at any point did you decide you wanted to go back to Germany, to see it, to experience it? And
To
if
go back
so, how did you feel?
to visit, or
To visit.
I did that quite a few times. As a matter of fact, still from Sweden in 1947, 2 years after the war. I had an uncle who had survived. He was married to a Catholic lady. He was therefore in a somewhat better position. He was not deported until early 1945 and survived, and so did his family. I visited him, and he suggested I should go to Wiesbaden, which I did. It was, at that time, my first visit, rather strange. I come to a town. I saw, first of all, I must say, I traveled by train from Sweden through Hamburg, Bremen, and to get to my uncle's house. I saw the devastation. I saw the cities of Hamburg, Bremen completely destroyed. It so happened that Wiesbaden was not as heavily bombed, and I could find my way like I did 8 years earlier. But it was a foreign town. The people whom I had bid goodbye 8 years earlier, they were gone. Upon advice of a lawyer, I went with a police official to our apartment. We get access. The tenant is not terribly friendly to see me. And I walked through that apartment. And it was quite an emotional moment, because the furniture, the rugs, the beds, it was like my family had left it a few years earlier on their final trip. Yes, we took some inventory. Ultimately, I got some token payments, but I was glad at that time to get back. I remember I had to stay overnight in Hamburg, walk through the town completely destroyed, until I finally could board the international train back to Sweden, and I was glad to get out from Germany. Especially during that trip, everybody I saw, what had they been doing during those years? I didn't want to, I couldn't talk to them, except for family and a few close family friends. Well, over the years, we traveled quite a bit to Europe. My father-in-law lived in Stockholm, and we had other relatives in Europe. And besides, we liked to travel. And we went to Germany quite a few times. But it took about 20, 30 years until I realized that a new generation had grown up. As a matter of fact, It was one incident, one trip. We were on vacation in Holland, close to the German border, and the hotel manager said, while you're here, you should go to Aachen, which is right across the border into Germany. They have a very interesting exhibit of Charles, his era, Charles the Great, historical exhibit. So we went there, and it was huge crowds visiting that exhibit. And looking around, I could tell the way people acted or the way they were dressed. They must be French. They are German. They are Dutch. They are American. Except the young people. Jeans and T-shirts, and they all looked the same. And that's made me conscious of the fact that a new generation had grown up, not burdened by the past, and I felt more comfortable after that on my trips. Also, I must say that another event happened around 1990. I received a letter from a teacher at the high school that I had attended in Wiesbaden, writing that the school, the upper level students and faculty were putting a book together about education at the school during the Nazi era. And they wanted to know what had happened to their Jewish students who had attended that school until they were kicked out in 1938. There were 8 of us, including my friend Leo and me. And I wrote back, I said, I find it interesting that after 50 years they developed an interest in what happened to their former Jewish students. And I could also tell them that 4 of us, of the 8 students who were still at that school at the time, that 4 of us, like me, had gotten out of Germany in time, and that 4, including my friend Leo, had been killed. And that developed into some correspondence, and ultimately it so happened we were in Germany for a family wedding when they published that book, and we were invited to attend the ceremonies. So we arrived by train in Wiesbaden, were met by the teacher who had written to me on a Friday afternoon, and she said, I want you to meet the principal before the publication ceremonies next Monday. And she takes me back to the school, to the office of the principal, very nice young man. And I said, I've been in this office once before when your predecessor notified me that I no longer could attend this school. Well, comes Monday, public ceremony, dignitaries press for the publication of that book to which I had contributed my story. Principal speaks. He welcomes my wife and me, thanks me for my contribution, and relates my visit, relating the time when his predecessor had kicked me out, and he used that language. And then I was asked at that occasion, would I like to speak to the students at that school? And before I knew, I had about 150 or 200 high school students in front of me. And I told them about my experience at that school 50 years earlier. And for about half an hour, then I said, you have any questions? those questions came fast and furious. Searching, interesting, including one question: are we guilty? I had to think for a moment. I said, you're not guilty of what happened during the lifetime of your grandparents, or more likely your great-grandparents. But you have to know the history of your country. You have to know what happened. And you have to make sure that it never happens again, and that you protect the freedom, the democracy, the well-being that you currently enjoy. You have to fight intolerance, anti-Semitism. Don't hate. It's not enough that your new constitution, the Constitution of Germany, that was adopted in 1948, in its first sentence says something about it is a responsibility of the state to assure, to protect the independence and dignity of every human being. And I told those students, it's not only the obligation of the state, but it's yours too. And it's the kind of message, as I mentioned earlier, that I always give when I talk to students here. Yes?
What has been your experience, and how have you felt as Holocaust denial has become more and more common, and as it's become a bigger phenomenon, I guess is the only close word I can think of, especially in the younger generations?
Holocaust denial has become more prominent in the younger generation. What are your thoughts on that, and how do we deal with that?
It's a difficult question. All you can do is speak up, in the synagogues. You have 2 museums here in town that organize student visits and have survivors like me speak to young people, telling them what happened. Unfortunately, in today's world, communications are slightly different. During the Hitler years, propaganda was limited to newspapers and beginning of radio. The mass of the enormous means of communication we have today, the internet, and especially social media, provide an opportunity for the propaganda of lies, of hate, and all you can do is counter it, spreading the truth as much as you can in whatever source of communication is appropriate at the time. You can only fight lies by speaking out loud the truth, and where needed, use your legal system where propaganda turns to be illegal. I don't have perfect answers because there are none.
Thank you so much, Paul, and I just am so grateful for all the details that you shared in your story. It's amazing how sharp your memory is, and I can't wait to read the book. But I would love to hear the story of how you reunited with your sister, how and when.
How you reunited with your sister and when?
Yes, I mentioned that we got reunited here in Los Angeles. We had departed when we were children. We met again 8 or 9 years later as young adults. My sister by that time was married. We became again family. I'm very close to her children. Her son is here tonight. And yes, I'm the only survivor of my generation. But it was a good reunion, and I have good memories, and as I said before, a happy and lucky life.
Where can we get more copies of this book?
Anytime.
Okay, from you?
For me
Or is it online as well? Or yeah, not yet? Okay. Okay, so if there are requests for the book, then email me, and then we'll find out how to get some copies for those in attendance. Oh, you can get it on Amazon? Okay, wonderful. It's called Memories, My Early Life in Germany and Sweden. I'm saying that for those here, but also those online. And for those who are not here, that you know, make sure that you go back onto YouTube of Sinai Temple, because this is recorded and this testimony is forever. And so it's on Amazon, beautiful. So it's on Amazon for those of you who are also watching at home. Memories, My Early Life in Germany and Sweden by Paul L. Kester. And make sure you send this testimony to your friends, to your families, to your communities. If you are in LA, Paul does speaking, so we can make sure that he gets to your schools and your workplaces and your communities as well. Paul, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and we are honored to be part of this community that you have also chosen to call home for so many years. Thank you, everyone. Have a meaningful Yom HaShoah. And next week, we'll have Yom HaZikaron as well as Yom HaAtzmaut. Be in touch, okay?